forward, Neepa, to a stimulating discussion. Over to you.
Okay, thank you both, and I really thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate your coming out on Diwali. I actually was totally prepared for maybe 3 or 4 of us chatting about the films. So I will share my screen. I have a PowerPoint. I'm going to just very quickly, I hope quickly, introduce the filmmaker of the first film that we watched, which is The Little. I really thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate your. Is somebody else? I'm not hearing anything.
We can hear,
Oh, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, because I heard another voice while I was speaking. So, okay. Let me just move this up. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun, which is now I see in newer writing is being translated as The Little Vendor of the Sun, which is more direct translation from French. And I hope you will keep this image in mind. He has, in his other films that I've seen, he has this striking use of, you could say, multiple modernities, where I would sort of resist speaking in terms of oppositions between tradition and modernity, colonialism, post-colonial, rather than binaries like that. I would see them together, and especially because Mom Betty in his films always layers them together. So you have the airplane and the man breaking the rocks, two technologies, the mallet that he's using to break the rocks and the airplane, existing simultaneously. This is Senegal today. Senegal, both of them are part of modernity. It's not like one is rural, one is urban, they're all part of the reality of today. So just to quickly go through and talk a little bit about Mambeti, who passed away at a very young age of lung cancer in 1998. He comes from probably the country that's in Africa with the most famous filmmaker from Africa, Usman Sembene. And Mambeti stands out among a host of brilliant filmmakers from Africa of this period because he is the one filmmaker most frequently identified as an avant-garde filmmaker, very strongly influenced by or responding to new waves around the world, especially French New Wave. If you know the Godard films, early Godard films, you would see a lot of similarity with Mambeti's other films, not this one as much, but certainly Tuki Buki, for example. So his most famous films are Tuki Buki and Hyenas, and this film was released posthumously. He had no film training, unlike Sembene, for example, who was trained in filmmaking in the Soviet Union, and he worked with no script. The influences are things he himself mentioned in interviews. Pretty unruly guy. He talks a lot about how he was, as a kid, he was one of basically considered like a delinquent. Again, this has sort of resonances with, say, Truffaut, and if you've seen 400 Blows. So I think this is a pretty interesting, in the video that's in the chat, you will see he talks about grand-mère and grand-mère, which sound the same in French, and he likes to put them together, grandmother and grammar, meaning oral storytelling, very deeply grounded in generational passing of knowledge in Senegal. And there is a grandmother in the film, as you know, And then cinematic grammar, the rules and formulas of filmmaking. And he wants to combine the two. He has this quotation there where grandma tells the old stories differently each time. But when she gets lazy and tells it the same way, I get upset and I ask her to tell it differently. So obviously it's his metaphor for why he doesn't want to make films in the kind of standard linear storytelling mode. And I will say that Little Girl is less experimental than his other films, where, for example, Tuki Buki, for the first half hour, you just have to sort of go with the flow, because you just don't understand what's happening. You know who the two main characters maybe are, but you see a lot of different things, and there's a lot of non-linear editing where the same shot is repeated multiple times. They're not jump cuts, but they repeat it in very odd and disturbing ways. So that's his play with cinematic language. And we can talk about parts of this film where you thought that there was play with cinematic language, meaning with audiovisual detail and so on. And then in the same video, he talks about we need to reinvent cinema. And that language to me is very reminiscent of Godard's statement, where he said, I want to work with the cinema as if it has just been invented, and begin from scratch. And not only begin from scratch, but feel that excitement that a new technology gives us. He and Mambeti feel like it's become stale. And then he wants an African film language that would exclude chattering and focus more on how to make use of visuals and sounds. So this is actually very similar to the kind of discussion about cinema that took place in the early years after the coming of sound, which is that just reduce the dialogue. Let's cinematic language do the storytelling. So both films actually that we watched today have very minimal dialogue. And I think that's part of this idea of using the language or the grammar of cinema. And then on film structure, he says he does not like to think in terms of structure because it means premeditation. He likes to not plan. It's based on the instant. Now, of course, there's planning in terms of the idea for the film. And I'm sure there's more planning than this makes it sound, but I like the idea of the instant, because I think it helps us think about the film we're watching today as a collection of instants. It also helps us think of his other more challenging films to watch. If we think of them as a collection of instants that are not necessarily logically connected, we might find our way through them more easily. The other thing that I find interesting is he says that the instant is forced by the necessities of movement. And of course, movement is at the heart of the cinematic medium. And so it seems to me that, and both movement and the instant are about time. So duration. So if we think about the movement of whatever he is showing, depicting whatever the instant is, I'll tell you, I don't know exactly what this means, but I think it's interesting. I find it interestingly complex and opaque enough that it allows us to have a discussion about it. So he says movement creates its own internal dynamic, and the different effects of a film, text, music, image, arise from this dynamic. So if we think about movement as part of text, music, and image, I think that's pretty interesting, and that they cannot be removed. The second thing about Mambeti, other than that he's considered the avant-garde filmmaker, is that he is most closely identified with his work on sound. He is the director of sound. If anybody teaches a course on sound, as I have several times, Mambeti has to have a place in there, because for him, sound is not just a support for the image, a very kind of natural support for the image. He always denaturalizes the relation between sound and image. And again, unfortunately, I cannot show any clips. They don't work well on Zoom. So we can't hear the way he layers sound, but I will show some stills, and maybe you can think about that the next time you look at it. But you can think about sound as movement as well. And then satire. You can see some of that in this film. It's much more strong in his other films. He's attacking socio-economic, socio-political forms, inventive editing style. I think that the layer of satire, or at least the layer of socio-political forms, is there in a subterraneous kind of way in the visual field of our film today. There's a lot of references that allow us to contextualize the little story of this film in the bigger story of Senegal as a post-colonial country. The satire is maybe a little bit there. Inept government, police, that kind of thing. The police are all buffoons in his films. Maybe not so much in this film, but certainly we do have the police scene in the film. So this film is part of a planned trilogy of films titled Tales of Ordinary People. He made only two. This one is the one which he died before he could make the third one. Okay, so I think that the main character is so charismatic. So I wanted to track her down. And so this is what she looks like today. This is the only film she made, because obviously she's not an actress. She is he used non-professional actors. And what I was saying earlier about him layering different Senegals together in the same image, this is one among many that you see in this film when he shows different scenes from Dakar, the capital of Senegal. These high-rise these new buildings coming up, and then the cart that the man is pushing along. He wants to place these all side by side because that's the reality. And of course, I mean, in India, we don't have any difficulty understanding that. We see this in our daily life all the time, is these many Indias coexisting visually in the same frame. And he very consciously does that. I would say that he uses, and because he himself has cited Soviet montage as one of his influences, I would say that we see him use graphic montage here, which is Eisenstein's idea of different elements clashing within the same frame. In his other films, he also does a montage between shots in a very sort of Eisensteinian kind of Soviet montage style. Sound. So we can't hear the sounds, but this figure, this boy is present right from the beginning of the film. If you watch it only once, you may not realize he's there at the very beginning of the film as well. He's a figure who lasts throughout the film. He controls the sound of the film. There are many moments in the film where you think that it's background music, then it turns out that it's coming from his machine. And there is one scene, this one, that's why I took a still of it, where the music starts with the kind of radio sound that you hear when you're tuning a radio. So you can tell that a filmmaker is interested in sound if they incorporate noise into the soundscape, and if they don't eliminate what most other filmmakers would eliminate. So his inclusion of the radio sound of tuning is again a sign of this sort of interest in different types of sound, layers of sound. The music of the entire film was composed by his brother, Wasis Diop, who's still living. He's the father of Mati Diop, who you may have heard of. She's really a rising star from Africa, though she lives, I know filmmaker, I personally know a filmmaker from Senegal who insists that she's not African. because she's based in Paris. But Mati Diop won a Cannes award for her film Atlantics. I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe last year. I don't remember, last year or 2 years ago. I had actually wanted to include one of her short films. She made a coronavirus short film, wonderful film, this summer, but it is so copyrighted and so difficult to. Basically I couldn't download it. They had all protections in place. So if you can see anything by her, she is a very interesting filmmaker. Whether or not she's actually African or not, it's the same question with somebody like Mira Nair. People will debate how much does Mira Nair represent, even if she began her career in India, and even if she had, in the case of Mati Diop, deep roots in the cinematic layers of the traditions of her country. Okay, so then some references, if you recall, Yadi Khan is when the rich guy gives Silly, the little girl, he buys all her newspapers. It's just him sticking in a little reference in there, very Godardian, kind of inside joke type stuff, which Godard loved to do, where Mambeti, before he died, created this organization for street children called Yadi Khan. It was named after this figure in colonial times who was technically an outlaw, but was a hero of the people. And then this is where there's a lot of the first news she on her first day of selling, she talks about something like the value of the franc declining. So and then on this second day, Africa has quit the franc zone. So he gets to the heart of the relationship between Senegal and France in the most efficient visual way possible, because the relationship at heart is not about culture. It's about economics, and about, literally at this point, it's about the IMF and the connection to the global currency. So there's a series of shots like this where I didn't do any screenshots of the other scene that I think it's worth referring to, where Silly and the boy have a conversation about why she sells Soleil and he sells Sood, which is South. He sells Sood because it sells better. And why does it sell better? Because he says it's the newspaper of the people. And she says, then what's Soleil? And he says it's the government's paper. So it's the official news. And she decides to stick with Soleil because in a kind of future-looking optimism that maybe if she sells more of Soleil, the government will become closer to the people. And obviously that means that the government is not close to the ordinary people. So it's a simpler way of doing this would be to make your hero sell Sood and proclaim their alignment with the people. But Mambeti always does things in a more complicated, indirect way. So I just wanted to flag that. Okay, so moving on to Tokri, I wanted to make sure that this was my first image in case anybody missed why the watch is so precious to him, because he got it from, I hope you can recognize who he got the in that image is a whole tale of her life, an entire story of a person's life and its disappointments, its promises and its disappointments. But it also tells us something, or at least it made me ask something, which is that we see the little girl with all the signs of a school-going girl, with a school bag, a school uniform. There are books. She's reading a book, though she only picks it up when her dad comes home. She's doing usually something else. And there are books in the house, but we never see her go to school. So we don't know. We have no way of knowing. We assume, given that the father has a he has a job. He has a relatively okay job. I mean, they are not homeless. They are living okay, but certainly not living up to the promise of this image. So I'm just going to end with a few comments about how we can think about a stop motion animation film. This is just one of the best stop motion animation films I have seen from anywhere in the world. It took 8 years to make. Um, some things that I noticed, again, I think it has a tremendously interesting use of sound, because in addition to a really layered and textured visual field, uh, and again, I've put a link to a making of video in the chat. It's really remarkable. You could see why it took 8 years. But the streetscape, the sounds of the street, are what work to create this sense of a real world. It's a world building activity. I wanted to just show you that, details are repeated, that on repeated viewings, one notices the details. There's a little moment in the film when it's a crowded street and the sounds are all so familiar to us, the honking and all the music, snatches of music, all the sounds that we hear. There are two little dogs on top of a little low roof of a hut that are kind of, for want of anything better, talking to each other. So little details like that repeated go a long way towards adding depth to this narrative. As far as the narrative is concerned, I think we know that it's built on repetition, with the father coming home. It's repetition with variation. The storytelling works without dialogue because of repetition with variation. And the father's change in expression, gesture, he's slouching. All of these are also very challenging things to do when you are building your objects for stop motion. And then you've got the indoor and outdoor sonic world. Some things overlap, others don't. I think it would, if we could have watched some clips, it would be interesting to compare the sonic world of the indoor and the outdoor. And then the two worlds come together at the end of the film, where the father is sitting with the girl on the silent street very early in the morning. So that's all I have. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Let me stop the share. I will say one last thing is, obviously the two films are, narratively speaking, in terms of subject matter, very similar. The filmmaker of Tokri said that he got the idea for the film because he passed by a little girl trying to sell him a basket on his way home from work, and he didn't buy the basket, and he began to feel very guilty about it, wondering what her story was, why she needed it, why she was selling it. I mean, obviously we know why she was selling, but he felt guilty about not buying one. So that's where the story came from. One last thing that I would mention is both films end unhappily, you could say. But as with such films, it's I mean, some such filmmakers seemingly don't want to indulge in fairy tales, even though, you think about the story that the little girl tells in The Little Girl Who Sold the Sun, about the hare who wins the competition, which has a happy ending. He doesn't want to give us that happy ending. We get the happy ending the first time those boys attack her. It too is a film about repetition, but we don't get the happy ending the second time. And in the case of Tokri, it's all a fantasy. So she is not able to repair it. She does not have the money. And such films also, nonetheless, give us something to take away with us. The little girl does not freak out. she says, we carry on. And we have that image at the end of the boy and the girl disappearing into the sun as they leave this building, and the other boys sort of move to the side, make way for them as they pass. So visual, in this case, it's visually that we see some kind of movement forward into what we don't know. So I'll leave it open here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Neepa, for that introduction. Anyone would like to open with comments, questions?
Okay. Hi, Nandini here. Thanks, Neepa. Those were, sorry, it's very noisy here because it's Diwali. Thanks. Those were really lovely. I think I hadn't heard of Tokri before, and I mean, it was just absolutely fun. What I really liked about them is, of course, the fact that they're framed by the urban. And I think that that is something that I found extremely interesting. Well, by definition, street children in that sense do get framed within the urban, because we do talk about the urban street, so it is the urban. But they both give a very fascinating account of two cities that are so similar. And I think that to me, since I am from Bombay, and and it's just I found that very fascinating. And the other thing that I found very fascinating, and maybe you could talk about this a bit more, because I do work in sort of cultural studies of childhood, and I feel, and I do a lot of films. I mean, in my courses on films with children, and one of the things that I found repeatedly in almost all the films, almost many films, which are not sort of nostalgic, like Potir Panchali, or which don't bring this out so much. But even Potir Panchali, no children's film is really about children. Just like is for children, So they are for adults. And here you actually, in these two films, you see also the way in which there's a politics of childhood and the urban that's being played out in both cases. More in the not Sembene, the Senegalese director's film, but also in Tokri in some sense, in the outdoor scene. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And so the question of, they're less, what I liked is that they're also less celebratory in that very false way, They're very gritty, and yet they have humor, and they have pathos, and so they came together very beautifully. Thank you. Those were really lovely films. Thank you. But I liked the way in which is urban power, this whole thing of children also commenting on contemporary politics, which they do. I mean, they're doing it for us. But the way in which that comes in is really lovely. Thank you.
Those are fabulous comments. Thank you so much. I hadn't thought about the idea of childhood being presented through an adult frame. If you've seen 400 Blows, I feel like that film too, and that film is, again, Paris is another protagonist in that film. That film also is really a child, is not, it is, while you might say it's not a film aimed at children, anecdotally, I can tell you, I have a colleague, I teach film studies. I have a filmmaker colleague, his daughter and mine are the same age, they're now grown up. But when his daughter was 4 years old, he showed her 400 Blows, and his 4-year-old daughter became obsessed with it. And he had to show it to her every day. And I think children actually feel an alliance with unfairness. And in the world of 400 Blows, this little girl said, I want to see the film about the boy with the unfair parents.
Yes.
So, you have this feeling in this film too, that there's a kind of the thinking that a child might have is represented in the film. So beyond that, I'm not an expert in childhood studies. I have colleagues who are. We have a childhood studies program, actually. So you probably know more than me. But I really like your point about, I hadn't considered the idea that many of these films show children navigating the city and kind of the city embracing the children in some way. The city kind of provides for the child in one way or another. They are very savvy at navigating the streets. It's their playground. I love the scene in Little Girl where she's got money now, and she's got this lovely yellow dress, and she's dancing with the little girls behind her.
Yeah.
And then they go, and the boy with the radio provides their soundtrack, and they're sitting around. So this is their sort of, they've made do. She's come into wealth, and she's distributing the wealth. So
this is also another subtext in both, which is of education and the girl. And
yes.
I thought that was quite interesting. I don't know if I misread this, but the photograph, and I think Geeta and Nikhila, the others can probably say better, but the photograph that her father looks at every night seems to, like you were saying, has a lot of stories, and it seems to suggest him having had aspirations and having had almost a possibility of continuing to be educated. And I'm wondering whether that other person who's handing him this, was he representing Kalam in some way?
Yes,
Kalam,
yes,
right? Because you've got
yes.
unmistakable hair.
Unmistakable, yes.
But so there you have that girl who's also always in a school uniform. There's this education as a text. And in this film, you also have education as a text, where this brilliant thing of her signing with the sun.
Yes, yes.
And the fact that, there's constant reference to the fact that she can't read, but she still knows. And
yes.
I found that also quite fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, and similarly, the boy says he can't read, but he can read the Quran.
Yes.
And the grandmother.
And they're selling newspapers.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's
definitely a subtext of education. Another great.
And also the signage of the city, which is very prominent in Tokri.
Yeah.
So
yes. Yes.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to step in at this point? Okay, Sanjay.
Yes, just a minor detail in the film. What you call the little. What is that? The title?
The little girl. The
yeah,
little
yeah,
girl?
yeah. So in that film, there is this boy who is on the horse cart. He is wearing a T-shirt. So on this T-shirt, there is something which is written in French, which is pour une scolarisation massive des filles. So that is for a massive schooling of girl children.
Oh, really?
That's what it is written on the T-shirt.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
So something related to the the thing of education, and as it has already been pointed out in another film, that she's also wearing, the little girl is wearing a school dress, and we don't see her going to the school. It's already more than 10 o'clock when she is still preoccupied with the watch, the clock.
Yes.
So by that time she hasn't gone to school. That means that day she's at least not going to the school.
Yes.
Yeah. And another day also she's just trying to sell her baskets.
Right.
So in this film, La Petite Vendeuse de Soleil of Mombeti, this girl is obviously not very educated, but she can understand French. When this man who is wearing the blue jacket and who comes out of this shop, Laetitia, which is very famous in France, and he's obviously rich, and he has 10,000 franc to CFA franc to give to this child. That time he speaks in French, and she understands, she follows, and she replies, yes, because he's asking whether you are the granddaughter of that lady, and
the blind lady.
Yeah,
oh,
blind
okay.
lady. And she says yes. That means she understands that much of French. And in fact, the news, from where she goes to buy the newspapers, that lady is sitting there with her boss.
Yeah.
She says something, and she is using a kind of language which is mixture of French, Arabic,
And Wolof.
and Wolof.
Yeah,
French,
yeah.
Arabic, and Wolof. That is something typical of Dakar French.
Ah.
Dakar language, I mean, Dakar language, because there, people are speaking in a type of variation, it's a variation of Wolof, which uses a lot of Arabic words and also French words. And when she is counting, she uses again French. She's counting the newspapers and she gives it to her. Then, so the use of French language is there in this film, which is also visible in the on the front page of the newspaper, Le Soleil, and the other one is Sud. So that is south, and the Le Soleil is the sun. Okay, so in this newspaper we have two. I mean, the second day she starts selling the newspaper. So we have headlines about this person, Yadikon, which we have already pointed out. Yadikon is the Robin Hood of Senegal.
Yeah.
He has been valorized a lot by the Senegalese population, not only Senegalese population in general, but also by Mombeti particularly. In the video, I don't know which video you have sent, but in one of the videos, I think probably it's the same one, where Mombeti says that, when he was a child, this person, Yadikon, was very popular among the children. He liked children, in fact, and he was kind of, robbing rich people and distributing money to the children and to the poor people. And also he was fighting against the colonial forces. So for these reasons, he is considered as a hero in Senegalese population. And when this person who is wearing blue jacket and comes out of this Lycia, he offers her 10,000 francs, which she is not, she's reluctant to take that money because it's a huge money for 13 pieces of newspapers.
Yeah.
But he insists and he uses, take it 4 times. Okay. And then finally she takes it. And then as an excuse, why he's buying all the newspapers, he says, because Yadikone has, the son of Yadikone has escaped.
Yes.
That is the front line, that is the front paper news that day. And another day, when the third day, the news in the newspaper is about the devaluation, I think. Devaluation of money, and again about Africa coming out of CFA franc zone.
Yeah.
So this one, I don't know, it sounds a bit surrealistic for me, because till today, Africa and Senegal particularly is in the zone of CFA franc, which they are going to change, obviously. They are going to name another new currency, which is called ECO. ECO, because recently the French President Emmanuel Macron, he went to Africa and met some leaders, and he said that, if you want to come out of CFA zone, you can come out. This is the option given to the countries. So I don't know what will be the form of this zone, but the CFA franc was introduced in 1945 in Africa, and in which 14 countries from Africa participated. So this was a huge advantage for France.
Right.
Because all these 14 African countries from their central bank had to deposit 50% of their exchange currency to French treasury. And this has been cited an example of neo-imperialism in Africa. It has been a huge subject of controversy that France was trying to control the economy of these countries. And it has been raised by many Pan-Africanists, including Samir Amin, for example, which he has mentioned in his book also. And he spoke at several platforms that France is trying to control and at its own will sometimes devalues the money.
You just got muted.
Sorry. So, it has been cited that France sometimes devalues the money, and in order to suit its own interest, uses this currency CFA franc. So that sounds to me a bit prophetic when this the news appears in Le Soleil that Africa is out of CFA zone.
Yeah.
It's not still out of CFA zone. Probably in 2020, by the end of I don't know, December, it will be out. But what will be the form of the new currency, we don't know. But all these things are very interesting, that how you already raised the question of tradition and modernity and side by side, showing. And there are a lot of other things also to discuss.
Thank you very much. I mean, I don't know French at all, so this is extremely helpful. There was signage there that I didn't know. It really adds, I think, depth. Your comments add depth to the meaning of the film, and having hearing about the monetary relation, the financial relation between France and Senegal in depth, I think does tell us even more strongly how he has commentary in the film just through signage.
Would anyone else like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, thanks a lot, Neepa. Thank you, Sanjay and Nandini. I just wanted to add a point that, to add to the discourse we are having today, there is that image, when you have the, the paper getting printed and it is superimposed over her face, that is. So, that the idea of, the literacy and the orality, that is juxtaposed, and that is what is, I think, beautiful about the film. In a way, it brings out the spirit of Mbeki, that things coexist. It's not like, one kind of erases the other or one is in binary. That is, even if there is a slippage, like she cannot read, but yet she wants to bring the government to the people through the newspaper. So, that kind of an aspiration, of Mbeki, I think that's what makes him special. That also it complicates because that here in MSU we have Ken Haro, who is a big scholar on these films. He teaches Mbeki. So I sat through his class.
Oh, he's in your university. Yeah, I like his work. Yeah.
Yes, he has written on post-colonial African cinema and the Trash, his recent book, totally on African films. So the readings, for his class, when I was going through, that you can see, that the scholars want to read him as, as somebody who is avant-garde, as you pointed out, he's special. At the same time, they privilege his sense of the surreal or the magical, like The Last Shot, which allows us for like multiple interpretation or multiple modalities, coexisting in his films. And, but I feel that, his films also complicate that idea because, there is a certain kind of temporality, not only in this, but in Tukibuki and Hyenas, that there is a kind of realism, to his kind of, what we can call as the sequence kind of shots, the long takes he has.
Yes.
For example, when she is wandering and loitering, with these guys, we can see the streets, we can get that feeling of the real. But then that is not the, the realism of the Bazanian long take or the Eurocentric realism. Because, with that, he will, she will fall here flat and then he will jump to something else,
Yes.
So that's something, there is this interest in trying to, honor the temporality and rhythm of African life, but not in an Eurocentric way. I mean, he is more invested, in also, what that kind of a weather and milieu and culture, does to, our idea of time, so for example, that talking about, Tamil's preeminent writer, the last century, Pudumai Pittan, one of our critique, Kana Subramaniam, major critic, he used to call, his style or his aesthetics as Tavalai Pochal Nadai. That is, it's like the leap of a frog, that jump, his kind of style.
Yeah.
So that always comes to my mind when I see Mambety's film.
Yes,
It's
very
like
nice way.
Tavalai Pochal Nadai, like the frog's leap, his aesthetics. So that kind of one realism is there, but yet that it is not about a linear kind of a realism, like we see in neorealism or even in Roy. It's a different kind of work actually.
Yes.
So it is not one or the other, like his
Right.
philosophy.
Right.
It's like as they say, feminist, like he is not speaking for her, but with her, with this character.
Yes.
So that is what is, I think, beautiful about the film. And
yeah.
Thanks also, Neepa, for Tokri. It was, I felt it very emotional.
Yes.
A very beautiful film.
Beautiful film. Yeah. Yeah.
Not only it has been, painstakingly done, but the as some of the animation scholars, when they talk about the philosophy, animation in a way is also about childhood.
True.
Whereas in the West, it has become more and more about as Angela Smith and others, talk about, about the hideous progeny, the horror element, like Let the Right One In, or, the children of the, monsters or horror figures. But
Yes.
here it is the reverse side, the gracefulness, not the hideous, the gracefulness, So it's really very moving, and also when you see in stop motion, as you pointed out, that the gestures are so loud and pronounced, that you can see pure emotion, the screen.
Yeah. And the
that is what
gestures are accompanied by a sound that, like when the Tokri is being she's making more, and you have time lapse, and they're all accompanied by the sound, or when it's smashed by the car running over it. It's like pure emotion, as you said. Wonderful point.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Swarnavit. Anyone else?
Geeta, can I come?
Yeah.
Yeah, this particular aspect of emotion that Swarnavil pointed out just now in Tokri, I thought one of the most interesting narrative sequencing comes with the kind of false ending, what turns out to be a dream, and then so I found that very, very fascinating, in the way in which the narrative is structured. So we would think that it is fairly simple and straightforward, and then you have this little twist which kind of makes so much pathos, brings so much pathos into the whole narrative. About the second movie, the girl who sold the sun. I thought one of the most wonderful aspects of this film was her sheer spunk. I mean, she's such a spunky kid.
Yeah.
She can give back good, to the boys who are after her and who are troubling her. So there's something so wonderfully. I mean, she easily takes on the people around her. So I thought that was really very striking about that character. And I was also wondering, Neepa, if I'm overreading it, but the title, the girl who sold this, and before one actually watches the film, one really doesn't know what to expect, and it just seems like she is bold enough to actually or ambitious enough or whatever to actually sell the sun to whoever it is. So great that we are watching these two films. It also happens to be Children's Day. So it's nice that we are watching these two films and talking about them. Thanks for suggesting these two films for the festival. Really enjoyed watching both the films. Yeah, thank you.
I really agree very much with your what you said about the title, that it is, and when it's in print, I sort of italicized the sun in my PowerPoint, but it's never italicized. So you don't know that it's not actually the son. And Mati Diop, his niece, made a film about Tuki Buki, his other film called A Thousand Sons. So she sells, you remember, the woman wants to give her 25 sons. And she says, no, 13 is my lucky number. And so, yeah, I totally agree that the meaning, her spunk allows us to consider the other more grandiose meaning.
Talking about children in the two films, I think both the films also foreground the very precariousness of the category of the child, because both kids enter the labor market, and one is left wondering what then is a child, and what is the difference then between an adult and a child. And at the same time, there is quite clearly a distinction between the way the two children are represented in each of these films. In the case of Tokri, the child is still, framed within that conventional idea of the child as innocent, because when she goes out into the street, it seems quite clear that it is her first day out on the street. Even a vehicle whizzing past her, there is that expression of fear on her face. Whereas Silly in Little Girl Who Stole the Sun is, like she's so comfortable out on the street, and she's just ready to take on anyone who bullies her. And she is what is known as street smart here. Huh? So I think it kind of problematizes the very notion of childhood, both the films, in a sense.
Yeah, wonderful points. I mean, I think this discussion has been so rich. I feel like I've learned so much in thinking about the films.
Anyone else would like to come in? Anyone who has not yet spoken? Yeah, Nikhil, you're unmuted. Yeah.
I have one comment and one question. So Nikhila mentioned that the dream sequence where it seems like the watch will be fixed. And then when it was very close to the end of it, I felt, okay, if the girl could think of this, why not the father? So, but then when we come back to the reality, then I said, oh, wow. So that is something very nice. So, I mean, how did you feel when you were watching it?
I can say I was saying, please let this be a fairy tale. I don't care how it worked, but let this be a fairy tale. And I saw, the comments actually in the video link that that you all watched. And I noticed that there were others saying the same thing. Please give us a happy ending. So and knowing what Mom Betty says about folk tales and fairy tales, these two films got me really thinking about what is the value of a happy ending, whether or not it has any anchoring in reality. What does a happy ending do for us? And why do some filmmakers, the ones who think of themselves as grown-ups, deny us? This is one way in which this is not a film. These are not films for children. Films for children will not give us unhappy endings. They may give us violent endings. In the case of many folk tales, I would say, and certainly the European fairy tales have a lot of violence in them. But it really got me thinking about, we will off the cuff say, oh, that's just a happy ending, it's not real. But there are maybe other ways to think about happy endings. I will say that I liked the way this film ended. Whether or not it satisfied my demand, because a different kind of happy ending was offered to us.
Yes, okay. And there is a question about the other film, the Senegalese film. I was wondering if, because the first question that I had in mind was about the very sparse dialogue. So you already spoke about it. And then the second question that came to my mind was about uh, the choice of the character. So he has handicapped characters. So working with people who are handicapped in real life. So is that a choice, or is it because he has such a story that he has to work with a person who is not actually an actor? So does it have any impact on the final product of the film, or do you think that going for a professional actor wouldn't have made any difference because the filmmaker would be the same?
I think so. I don't know the circumstances of production of the film. I tried finding out about it, but people are not. I didn't find out anything. I do think that one thing we can say is that her disability is central to the plot of the film. So you couldn't replace her with somebody else. And as to whether the story came first or the character came first, knowing that he doesn't, well, at least he claims he doesn't work from scripts, he works in the moment. My great sense is that he found her first and built the story around her. That would be my guess. I don't. It's not based in any information I have. I just find her, she has a presence even beyond whether she's given a role that makes her spunky. She has a presence that goes beyond that, and I think he was very successfully able to harness it. This is the only reason I wanted to find out, where is she today, what is she doing because she seemed such a powerful presence.
Yes.
But I don't really know the answer to your question.
Okay. And one request sort of question. You, when would you be showing some of your own shots to us? I mean,
I'm not a
because I'm quite
filmmaker.
curious. Oh,
I'm not a filmmaker. I'm on the critical studies side of our film and media studies. We have a production studies and a critical studies, and we like to say that our filmmaking students are very strong in critical studies, and our critical studies students all have experience in filmmaking. But I'm not a filmmaker.
okay. That's so sad to know. I thought maybe some ideas you have on making film. So if you could talk about one of the ideas, maybe.
Some other time.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that the use of the differently abled girl child in the film, would you say, Neepa, it's also an indicator of the widespread violence that adults unleash through wars, and how the children have to suffer due to that? Because Senegal has a large number of people who are either killed or maimed in landmine explosions.
Yeah.
So probably this could be an indication of that larger situation of conflict and war in which children are victims.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Especially the boy in the wheelchair could easily be.
Anyone else? Sridhar. Okay, Sanjay.
Just a little more about the juxtaposition of the orality and literacy. That this when the girl Sili is talking to Babu Sek, and Babu Sek has they are talking about the story, and Sili says that my grandmother told me several stories and I can narrate them. So that shows the transmission of knowledge through, in the family from older generation to the younger generation. So she's able to narrate those stories. She's also able to sing a couple of songs. So when Babu Sek requests her, she can also sing. Interestingly, the story she has narrated, Silly has narrated, is already there in his book, the book
His
which
book,
he is
yes.
carrying. Yeah.
Yes.
The book which he is carrying is Le Liliev, which is written by two people, two writers, and one of them is Leopold Sedar Senghor, who was the first president of Senegal, and he was also a great poet and a great writer who so he wrote this book, and there are several. In fact, that story of hair that continues. I just read the beginning of the story, and it is exactly the story which she narrates. And the story which she narrates is exactly the same which is there in the book. So it's like, it's another way of saying that what you gain from literacy, it is also possible through orality, that it can be transmitted in the family. So this point of juxtaposition of orality and literacy is very interesting. As I already been pointed out, that she is selling newspaper, whereas herself she is not that much literate. Still, she can manage with French language, and what I found interesting in this film is that she has not been reduced to an object of pity. That just you feel pity for her, poor girl, how she will manage in her life. She actually, you were talking about the selling of suns. Sun can also represent the selling of hope, that she spreads hope wherever she goes. She gives hopes to people. So if you see, she is marginalized in multiple ways. In her family, there is only grandmother. She is poor also. She is not very she is not literate, and she is you can see that in she is living in a shanty town. She has to come to the main town, to the center of the market, where she can earn some money. Still, she prefers to sell the newspaper rather than beg. The first day she is begging, but the next day she starts selling the newspaper, and she shows the way to other people that they can also do that. In that sense, she is a source of inspiration rather than an object of pity. And she has that much courage that the lady which has been represented in the prologue of the film, she is accused of stealing something. She has that much guts. She goes to the police station and she says that, she is shouting and telling that she has not stolen anything, so please free her. And the policeman does that, the police officer does that. So she can not only she has the courage to defend herself, but she can also protect others, or she can fight for the rights of others. She is in a way support to her grandmother. Grandmother is supporting her, and she is also supporting her grandmother. She buys that umbrella, parasol for her grandmother, so that she will not have to face the sun. So we find that despite being physically challenged, despite being poor, despite not going to school, she doesn't prefer to beg. Rather, she wants to become independent. And she says one sentence that what a boy can do, a girl can also do. And this is exactly the sentence which is repeated by the newspaper distributor, the lady who is sitting at the stall.
Yes, yes.
So the same sentence which is repeated by her. Again, when she comes to the horse cart, and the boy carries her on the horse cart, and both of them, they are leaving for the town, for the capital, Dhaka. She says, "Let's go." In a tone, she repeats twice. "Let's go" means move forward. Okay, and this has been used again twice. At least 3 times it has been used. Second time when she is asking the policeman, "Let's go, let's go."
Right.
So I don't know Wolof, but I could hear the sound like "nine them, nine them." She repeats that. Okay, nine them. And this policeman, he
follows.
he follows, but he doesn't have that much courage. He says there must be something wrong. Maybe this girl is right. She doesn't have that much confidence, so he's lagging behind. This girl is leading him, and she's repeating, "Let's go, let's go." And again, at the end of the film,
at the end,
when the boys, they snatch her, scratch, and they run away. When finally Babu Sek comes and asks her, "So what next?" And then she says, "Let's go." Again. So move on, move on. Okay, don't think too much about these troubles. Move on. That's probably is a message for the whole Africa. I think it's message for Senegal. Yes.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point. And your comments made me realize that there's a happy ending buried in the film, which is the happy ending of the woman, the adult woman, with whom the film begins. She has a happy ending in a way, thanks to the girl. She's also, I mean, she's an interesting figure in the film. In some ways, she's the counterpoint of Silly. This is what Silly does not want to become. So I think I had forgotten to raise the question of this figure. But yeah, I think that she is she's a leader. And in many ways, this could take a dark turn, when the policeman takes her in, because we've already seen how that works out. So where the other policeman actually listens to her, that's a happy ending.
Yes. Anyone else? Anyone who has not? Yes. I'm sorry, I don't read Kannada, but this person has unmuted.
This is myself, Tarkishwar.
Tarkishwar, okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay,
thank you, Neepa, for the
Kannada nationalism.
Thank you, Neepa, for the films. I enjoyed both the films, and I just wanted to say that both the films complicate our understanding of childhood and the concept of child itself. In the first film, there is an uncle film. We also have children who are perpetrators of violence.
Yes.
So children are not simply the victims of violence; they're also perpetrators of violence.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it is complicating the notion of childhood. And the second point is that about the child labor. She's earning, and when she moves to the Dakar city on the cart with the boy, she clearly says that I have to take care of my family. So I have a family to take care of. So she is supporting the family.
Yeah.
And she has no qualms about it, and she has to work for it, to beg her to sell something. And in the second film too, the Tokri, it's also very interesting. She does something, and there's a loss to her father. She wants to compensate it, and she wants to compensate it through her labor.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the concept of child labor itself uh, is something else that our notion of children and childhood and child labor, they're all complicated with these two films. So again, I thank you for suggesting us to watch these two films.
Thank you for the comment about child labor. It is. I had not thought about the way in which in Tokri too we see a child. The only possibility of money is through child labor for her to replace the watch, and even that actually is not adequate. I think in both films too, the point about the child in the little girl who is not an object of pity. I think in the case of Tokri, she's not an object of pity, and the family is not an object of pity, but of deep felt empathy. And I think we should also think about the role of sound in both films in producing these feelings in us.
Yeah, and anyone else has anything to add to what has already been discussed? Yeah,
I just want to make a comment on ending of both the films. See, in the first, we are using this order as we like. The Tokri, in the Tokri we see disappointment of the girl.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the girl who won the son,
sold the son, yeah,
sold the son. Actually, it ended in hope.
Yeah,
world of hope, irrespective of her co-sellers, and their jealousies. She went ahead, as Nikhila put it, spunkiness of her, and not take it easy, courage. With in a broader understanding way, instead of buying a trouble, she moves on and also moves away from one place to other place for selling the newspaper. She doesn't sell in one place. First in a street, later to the airport, then they move ahead. So maybe it is a way of avoiding the trouble, but the trouble of co-sellers, but we don't know. Or she wanted to, she can sell, she might have thought that, or her colleague who joins her in selling the newspaper, he knows much about the market where he can sell more newspapers. So he also guides. Let us go to port. So that pushed somehow, but the trouble haunts them, co-sellers.
Yeah.
Even though she is differently able, that jealousy is
it's the same.
Same thing. So, but still, she, with that her courageousness, she ignores it and goes on. Even though that boy goes and picks up that her stick,
yeah.
Finally takes her on his shoulder also.
Yeah.
They enter into a world of hope. So that's maybe a political economy of Senegal we have to see.
Yeah.
So maybe of the various 19th century colonialisms and neo-colonialisms effect, they may be showing her in her differently abledness. We do not know. So, but still that Senegal is going ahead. Like we don't know the message the director wants, but it's interesting. The African colonialism history, they actually go ahead. There are it is very dynamic, unlike our Asian colonialism, African colonialism. So that kind of hope, it also the girl represents, even though she is differently abled. So maybe that is a symbolic presentation of Senegal itself. We don't know. So
yeah. your comments made me think about how, uh, though she's spunky, the film does not present her in an individualistic way. She has formed this sort of um, compact, you could say, with this boy. They help each other out, and together they are stronger than the crowd of little other boys who are harassing them. So it's this sort of horizontal alliances and solidarities. And the other thing that I was thinking during your comments was that when you said she moves from one place to another, I think it's notable that in both cases where she sells well, she is in the background. She's not actively seeking to sell. She's sitting on the steps, and the people come to her in the dock and buy them. And in the other case, she's leaning against a pole, and the rich man brushes aside everybody else, the little boys who are trying to sell, and he notices her. So I think that is also interesting, that she's not, in fact, when we do see her actively selling, she doesn't actually sell.
Geeta?
Yeah, Nikhila.
Yeah, there are a couple of comments in YouTube, so people are actually watching our discussion on YouTube.
Okay.
One, of course, Diwali wishes to everyone.
Thank
The
you.
other, I think this point had been made, I think, by Sanjay, but Veena Urumi points out how Babu Sek, the boy who helped Silly, is seen reading this book, which is a book of fables. I don't know how to pronounce the French name, by L.S. Senghor and Abdul Sadji. Silly narrates the same story while Sek is reading it in French, he points out. I think Sanjay had just made this point earlier, but I think it's nice to know that people are watching us on
Yes.
different on different platforms and in different channels. Yeah.
Yes.
Any other comments on YouTube, Nikhila? Is that all?
Yeah, just Gita, that book is written by Leopold Sedar Senghor and Abdoulaye Sadji, and the title of the book is La Belle Histoire de Luc le Lièvre, the beautiful story of Luc the hare. That's the book which Babu Sek is carrying all the time. But why he is carrying, it's amusing because he cannot read. He says himself that he can read only Quran.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Arabic. But he is carrying it all the time. Probably he wants to be away from the gaze of other people. You know, he's just holding it at his face so that, just he can be from away from the gaze of other people, because otherwise I don't see any reason. But it seems that he is very much fascinated with this story. He would like to read, and there are some sketches, there's some drawings inside the book, so he's fascinated with that. And the end, the last scene, when Babu Sek is carrying Silly is holding the book.
Yes. So the book is the equivalent of the crutch, because he rescues her crutch, and she gives him, she gives him the book, and at the end, as you pointed out, she's carrying the book. So they are kind of equivalent.
Yes. And the end of the story in Tokri, that actually negates the fairy tale kind of ending, which has been done by several writers, that they take one fairy tale and they try to show a different kind of ending. So here,
Yes.
what happens that when we are watching the film, it appears that when the father is hugging the girl, that time the film will end. But the film doesn't end, and it is revisited, the same scene, when the person sitting in the car, rather than buying her baskets and paying her enough money to get her watch repaired, or rather than giving her a lift to the watchmaker's shop, he throws away all the baskets. So that shows another But that would have been possible. In one sense, the story, the narrator would like to say that probably that is another end. That is another type of end where, a person sitting in the car helps. That doesn't happen. It's a different matter altogether. But even the final scene, I don't find it very pessimistic, in the sense that there is a kind of realization. The father doesn't, in a sense, he becomes indifferent. He doesn't scold her, he doesn't beat her, but he becomes indifferent because probably he is very much shocked by this, as he got it as a gift from the president. So he is not ready, he cannot come out of that shock. But in the end, it seems it's already late night, because all the shops are closed, all the shops are closed, and one time is already shown before that, some 7:30 or something. So it is after that, and the father goes there and he hugs her again. So that gives a kind of message that father says it's okay. If it's broken, then let it go. Okay, don't think too much about it. So even if you don't, don't get it repaired from somewhere, uh, it's okay. So that kind of message it gives, and I don't find it too much pessimistic. It's a kind of coming terms to with the reality. That's the reality, and let us face it. Let us face it. So in a sense, it also gives child an opportunity to become more mature. So let us move on, like Nindian, as Silly says in that film.
Yeah, actually, can I just say something here? Because this question of us seeking a sort of a closure that leaves us happy is a narrative that we have sort of that's pre-structured in our head. I think what is nice about these kinds of films is that they turn that on its head. I mean, as there's never that sort of point, right? So it's the ambiguity and the in Tokri, the father, it's the father's love for the daughter. So it is actually quite a happy ending. I mean, and of course, Mambeti's film also. There is never a closure if you're poor in a city. I mean, and if you have to work, I disagree to. I wouldn't personally see this as child labor, because I think children are in, the informal economies in most of our countries, and I wouldn't see it as child labor. It's a very bureaucratic category, so I'd rather not see it as child labor per se. It is definitely the labor of children, and that is there, but it's whether it's child labor, I don't know. But I think that's the interesting thing, that these films actually turn it on its head. I mean, these adult coming from certain class positions, certain social locations, we had that expectation of it. I mean, you were talking about Grimm, right? I mean, the honor of what is it, Bluebeard and so on. But even in many folk stories, I mean, in Thakumar Julie, I mean, the kinds of story, they're frightening, and yet they are actually told to children, So I think children can anticipate these kinds of endings as well. And somewhere as adults, we can't. We're still looking for that kind of, ideal that satisfies us as adults and as parents and as those in charge of children, kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Any more comments, questions, or shall we draw the session to a close?
And let people get back to the festivities.
Yeah, actually, there is a question that Bhagyalakshmi has asked me in the chat box about, I think she means the boy in the wheelchair. with the radio. She's asking, what is the importance of that boy? Yeah. So she's asking, what is the importance of that boy? He's there from the beginning to the end. Is he a kind of spectator? So this is Bhagyalakshmi's question. Yeah.
Very nice question. Yes, he's neither our twosome nor is he the group of bullies. He's he's the bystander with a very important role of as witness and also as provider of the soundtrack. He's also the other differently abled character in the film. Beyond that, I think what's beautiful about his presence in the film is it's open to readings. Just like the adult woman, though these two figures who are characters more than the others in the film. They have been activated out of the crowd and have become characters, but they are open-ended characters who are open to meaning, open to interpretation.
He features in the other film of the trilogy as well.
Yes, he does. Frank is the name of the other film. Yes, he's in that film too. Yes.
Okay, I think we've come. Yeah, please. Yeah, Sarkeshwar, go ahead.
Yeah, that boy in that wheelchair, his job is very interesting. It takes money from the people to listen to the radio.
Yes.
So you pay him and then listen to the radio.
Yes.
This job that is quite unusual, and this ties up with what others were discussing earlier in terms of orality and reading. So he provides others' voice to the people as entertainment. But as Neepa was saying just now, he is also a kind of spectator from the beginning to the end, and he wants to witness wherever there's an action. He moves in his wheelchair and follows that action. So that is quite interesting. This character and his profession in that narrative too.
Yeah.
Any more comments, questions? No? Okay, in that case, we come to the end of the second Saturday of the Short Film Festival. We have 2 more to go. And thank you all very much for joining in, despite the fact that today is Diwali. And we've had a really good session. Thank you so much, Neepa. And thank you all. And once again, happy Diwali.
Thank you.
Happy Diwali, and thank you all for your comments. It was a really rich experience for me. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All the comments. Thank you. Thank you, Geeta, Neepa, Nikhila, all the friends.
Thank you, Nikhila and Geeta. Yeah.
Everybody, yes.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. See you next week.
See you next week.
See you.